Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hopefully you can hear me because I'm sat on this side of the screen for once, so we'll see how it goes. But welcome to Fancy Football Scouts deadline stream this morning on this Saturday. I will be your Frank Lampard. I did a good job once every now and again. I convinced someone, but as soon as I'm found out, I'll be off and gone. And I am joined by the Jesse Lingard of the show. He had a good season once upon a time. He's tricked a few people since, but now he's down the table, but at least he's still got the vibes. How you doing?
I mean, that is the best introduction I've ever had, and also brutally, close to the mark. So I completely take that. It's good to be on the other side. We're both on the other side of the hosting duties this week, Seb. It's nice.
I know. So, shall we kick this off with a little bit of a word on Fanslide, and then we can get into our teams. We'll do the real teams when the time comes. We'll take some questions from the chat, and we're also going to have a little argument or conversation maybe. But over to you for this.
Yep, we've got to. The sound stopped as I started the sponsor, so it must have been okay on the intro stream and then not on the other one.
Okay. We copied that over from yesterday, didn't we? But I'll add you again.
Sounds back. Hello. Can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. Sorry, it's everyone said. Yeah. What one chance, Seb, and you blit. I think no, they're saying not the sound gone again. I think it must be this screen. Have you got audio output in there? And it's going up. Like the little bar. Sound back. Everyone's saying sound back. Yep. Can hear as only. Can't hear you now. We'll go straight onto the teams, by the way, once it's done. We'll come back to the sponsor.
Cool. Okay, you should be able to hear me as well on there now. And I'll go over to your team and give me a second to make sure we can hear you on there.
See, everyone. streaming stuff?
I don't know. It's pretty easy. I'm just an idiot.
Well, no.
There we go. So we're on your team, and we should be able to hear both of us. I'm so sorry about that, team. Thank you for pointing it out, chat. I appreciate it. As if people can hear you, over to you for your team.
Yep. Everyone can hear. Lovely stuff. It's only like Slippers has got 11,000 people watching. I'm sure he doesn't have to, have these kind of technical issues. But
that's why, mate. That's why.
But I tell you what, the viewers go up. It's incredible. No, they say it's gone again. Oh,
seriously?
Amateurs. Now we're back.
Okay. I think the reason it might be gone is obviously if I'm jumping to the next slide and then having to add it, there may be a moment in between. So if you can hear us now.
Do bear with us, guys. Seb is hosting for the first time ever. It's not as easy. The OBS is a pain to set up for the first time. So, right, we're done. 10 minutes to go. Let's go. We are all sorted now. I can put timestamps in. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, my team. I've talked about it on the team section. I don't need to go into too much. I mean, the big thing I'm waiting for is any news on Perisic, really, because there was some rumours last night that he was injured or had a bit of an injury, and then I haven't seen anything since. And I think the general consensus is he was in training. So unless something's happened in the training yesterday, then he's probably fine. So
and we saw pictures of him training, right?
Yeah, we saw pictures of him training, and I don't really want to lose him ahead of Forest away. I think it's a good fixture. Forest are the worst team statistically, defensively so far this season. So I'm keeping him. What I am surprised though is so many people buying him, or people buying him last week, because we were talking just before we came on, weren't we? Everyone knows the kind of upside with him, but there are players that you could have who are just definitely going to play every match, like Trippier, for example. I'm looking at downgrading him to Trippier at some point, and that gives me the money to upgrade Ward. So Ward and Perisic versus Trippier and a 4-5 or 4-6 goalkeeper, I don't really think there's any contest between that. So I love Perisic, but I just don't think this is the best time for him with midweek games and Champions League. So he's the only one in my team that I'm kind of
I think it's one of those, if you already had him or brought him in last week, brilliant, you can hold him.
Yeah.
This week, you're probably just gambling on today. I think he plays today, but then there's every chance you're not getting the next one, and we'll see how it goes from there. So maybe not the wisest move today.
Yep. And also I've got Mount as well, obviously. I'm doing Match a Day challenge tonight with Mark. And Mount is basically the only interesting player we have between us, because everyone else is sort of over 20% ownership. So relying on Mason Mount to do something a bit special, he hasn't done anything so far. But I couldn't sell him before Leicester at home. I've even suffered his price drop, but I just couldn't sell him. It's too good a fixture. So he's in, and we'll kind of see what happens later today.
Fair enough. Now, we'll move on to my team, and you'll have to bear with me a second while I make sure the audio works again. It probably will drop out, and then we'll be back, okay? So one moment, team. Thank you for your patience. Just setting it up now. That should be me. And that should be Az. It will take a little second on the stream. But if Az, you would like to say something just to make sure we can hear you.
Hello. I'm here.
Hopefully
people
can
good?
hear your gorgeous tones. So speaking of gorgeous tones, this is my team. It's exceptionally boring, and the transfer is boring to suit. I did Archer, that's third on my bench, to Stansfield, also third on my bench.
God. That is beyond
two
dull.
free transfers, 1 mil in the bank, the same team that everyone in the world has, which I'm very happy with. I've got fortunate. I picked a Gameweek 1 team that, was template enough, but also did well enough. I didn't have any files to put out. So both my transfers so far this season have been bench transfers, basically. Bailly to De Silva, and now Archer to Stansfield, just because Archer might go out on loan, might drop in price. Stansfield's on the other side of that, so I'll save that value and get a more likely to play 4.5. Otherwise, I'm captaining Salah, as I think probably most people are, unless they don't have Salah. Just mentioning no names there.
Well, he's backtracked on that, hasn't he?
Has he got Salah now?
Yeah, Mark will be going with Salah. The member stream last night, I think he's pretty settled on having him.
Andy talked him around.
Well, I think he just saw sense in the end. I mean, when I did Black Box with him, I tried to not be horrible and try and talk him into something. Or I tried to just be like, okay, this is why I think you should get him. This is why I think you should, that. And not saying that I have a lot of influence over Mark, but I just wanted to see if he could defend it, other than being a bit like, I kind of want to be a bit different. And I think he realised that he was trying a bit too hard to be different. So I think he'll end up with Salah, and I think it's the right decision.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, because Son was really his Salah alternative. but he took Son out. So I guess under that logic, he shouldn't be trying to fight the Salah any further if his thinking was Son will outdo him. So yeah, I think that's fair enough. Cool. Shall we do a few little questions from the chat in the last 5 minutes we have here? As if you'd love to grab those, because I don't want to touch any buttons.
you don't touch anything. I will grab some. Somebody's going through the chat. It's just all about the sound, and it's weird because the sound obviously worked to start with, and so that's normally when that happens. It's normally fun. That's why I wasn't checking the chat.
I know what happened. It's because we set it up last night, but we obviously only set up the first few with the audio. And then this morning when I'm doing our graphics, it hasn't copied sound over, but I assume it did because it copied everything else.
we don't bring me into this. I gave you all the tools.
I accept full responsibility and will take my punishment on the chin.
Mini League Mate team asked us how disappointed you are about Mark bringing in Salah. I mean, it's a kind of just quickly. I mean, I'm not disappointed. I think it's the right move, and obviously I want Mark to do well. I'm disappointed because tonight the match of the day stream is going to be less exciting. I was looking forward to seeing Mark with no Salah, with his head in his hands when Salah got his 4th goal against Bournemouth. But I think realistically you need to have him, so it's fine. Andy Brumby, Jesus or Salah captain? What do you reckon on that?
Salah for me. I mean, Jesus isn't bad, but it's always the way with Salah, isn't it? There's often another good captain, but the answer is just, but you've got Salah. And I feel like that's the case again. Sure, there's absolutely a world where Jesus outscores Salah, but I think if we played this week 10 times, 7, 8 of those, Salah comes out ahead of Jesus, which is why he's my captain. What about you?
Yep. No, I agree. I've got them both. I like them both. I think Jesus is my vice. It's a great fixture. They're both great fixtures. I think they'll both do well, both score. But if I'm looking at who I think can score more, I think if Liverpool turn up, they could get quite a few against. I
have memories of, was it several seasons ago now, where a lot of people sold Salah just before that. Was it Bournemouth match, wasn't it? I was one of those people, and then I think he went and got a hat trick, and never again.
I remember that. I don't think I had him for a while going into it, and then I remember a lot of people saying he's got 8 in 6 versus Bournemouth in the league, and he's got 27 in 30 against newly promoted sides in the league. So 27 goal involvements, not necessarily just goals, but it's a ridiculous record. So
I'm not always the biggest fan of so and so versus Bournemouth, because the last time we played Bournemouth, it was a very different team. But I guess the takeaway there is newly promoted. So generally weaker teams, he gets the points against, and it's hard to argue with that.
Yep, exactly. Tarek says bench one: Rodrigo, Mitrovic, or James. Would you want to bench any of those 3? That's a tough one.
Yeah, I would not bench. I'm assuming that's Reece James and not Dan James. I would.
Yep.
I would not bench Reece James. I don't think so. I guess the other 2, although not a bad choice. Rodrigo could be all right. Brighton will beat us. For what it's worth, Brighton are going to win 1-0. But Potter's maybe the best manager in the league. He's certainly 3rd. And if you gave him the budget of one of those other 2, I'd love to see what he could do. Man United, I want him to manage Man United, apart from the fact I don't, because I'm a Leeds fan.
I think I would swap Potter for Pep.
Fair. Fair. But, he needs... I mean, this isn't a criticism, but Pep often needs a bit of a budget. Not because he needs the checkbook to be good, but because his style of football really does demand the highest quality of player to carry out, which is why I think, Pep...
I'm sure you won't get any comments about that, Seb, in the chat. We've got 2 minutes. We better push on. I would bench Mitrovic out of those 3, I think, but reluctantly. Andrew Kolsnick, thank you for the super chat. Sometimes it's best to be patient on transfers. That's what I've done with Mount. So I was saying it's a fine line, isn't there, between patience and stubbornness, and trying to find that balance is sometimes a bit difficult. But sometimes you gotta give him a bit of time. Patterson or De Silva? There you go. How's that for a question? 1 minute before the deadline. Who would you play?
No, neither. Patterson.
Neither. Patterson as well. I think De Silva's probably going to miss out, right? How did you stumble upon Australia's Optus FPL TV? I have absolutely no idea. Luke Smith, will Bailey play? Probably. He came off the bench again, didn't he, in midweek?
I think he might. I think he's dropped again, so you might as well hold him at this point and then reassess with that transfer.
FPL the Wyvern, confident Perich will start? Nope, not at all.
See, I am. I think
you
he
are?
will.
Okay.
I think it's the next start that's in trouble.
AS triple captain Salah?
Double. Save it for a double.
Save it for a double. What are Gross's chances this week from Preniana? Good. I think we'll beat Leeds. We're not amazing at home, though, which is a bit of a worry, but I think Gross should do well. And that's it. Pens down.
Deadline is in.
Line is
So
done.
how's everyone feeling in the chat? You feeling confident? I mean, I'm assuming we've all got a team that's almost everyone at home. I have, and we've all got pretty similar teams. So who are people
Yeah,
hoping is their differential?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, who are the differentials? I mean, I've got Mount, for example. I'm not seeing a huge amount. I mean, even someone like Rodrigo's now like 25% owned. Tony's around the 20% mark.
Yeah.
And like I look at teams and they're all similar. And it's the difference between like a Saliba or a Zinchenko or a Ward versus a Sanchez or a what I mean? It's kind of like really, really kind of small calls. I think generally everyone's quite confident, right? I think a lot of people have got off to quite good starts. Not me or Mark, but a lot of people are kind of I'd say if you're in the top million at this stage,
Oh,
I'd consider that a decent start.
there's something
Uh,
like 10 points between like 100k and
yeah,
800k.
exactly,
So yeah,
exactly, yeah. And I think people are looking at their teams. They're filled with City players, with Arsenal players, with Liverpool players, with Chelsea players. The top teams. It's not like people are going in, and even teams like Leeds have started strongly in Brighton. So if you've got rid of your Aston Villa players and you're not carrying any Everton players or kind of dross like that, then I think you're pretty well set up. And like you're saying, people are burning transfers, moving for Stansfield. It's not been. I would say out of all the seasons I've played, I'm probably enjoying this start to the season the least.
yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, obviously rank helps with our enjoyment, of course, but even that aside, there feels like less opportunity for not even just being different, because I'm not that excited to be different, but there's less opportunity to find an edge to maybe
Yeah.
spot something that someone else hasn't. I wonder if this season, because of the perfect storm of prices and the big clubs having these good fixtures, we do have a lot of fixture congestion coming up. We do have a little fixture shift coming up. I wonder if this season the differential almost is just holding your nerve. Stick with this template. Stick with the players that are doing fine. Don't try and be different until the opportunity comes to you, rather than trying to go and find it yourself. So
Yeah,
when those fixtures do come, that's the time.
I think that's good advice, and I think I think Mark was unlucky, right, with Salah and Son, because Liverpool have got off to a bad start. Salah hasn't been playing particularly well. He's been quite far on the right, and and if I'd looked at those results and looked at the Southampton 4-1, for example, and see, I would have expected Son to at least have a couple of goals by now, and then there's not a huge amount in it between them. So this is the problem when you do go against things. I'd say in the last two seasons, I think those swings have been really, really punishing. And, we saw it last season with things like the Havertz at Norwich thing when people backed against Salah. We've seen it in other kind of instances. So, sometimes you need to kind of not force it, like you say, and just kind of wait. But it's difficult because we should probably come back to Fanside in a second and talk about that because no one heard it. But we're going to talk a bit about our approaches to the game and things like that. And I think the one similar thing that Mark and I do have is that we play this game for like fun, and we want to be a bit different. We want to kind of do things that are a bit kind of out there, and this season just doesn't lend itself to that at all.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a shame for the way we play.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I mean, lots of people get different things out of FPL. Whether it's making a game you weren't previously interested in interesting, whether it's just chasing the highest rank possible, or whether it's just beating a mate in your mini league, or picking a player, picking a player you support and watching them do well. I think any of those approaches are entirely fair enough. It's arguably the important thing is to try and identify what it is you're trying to get out of it, and then, to use that word, optimizing your approach to do that.
Here we go.
But if it is to be different, if it is to, because I was talking to Mark last week and he was saying like what he enjoys is finding a player himself or finding something a little bit different and trying to get ahead of the crowd or do something different. That's entirely fair enough. If you're doing that with the end goal of having the best rank possible, I don't think it's the best approach. But if your goal is to play in the way you want to play, enjoy your weekend, I'm never going to argue with that.
No, exactly, and you can't, right? People play this game in different ways, and we are seeing more people trying to play in this kind of using the model and using kind of algorithms to start and try and play in this kind of like perfect. Not that there's no perfect way, but it's a different approach to someone who just kind of plays for fun. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle of that. Like I look at a lot of stats. I look at a lot of, I use like FPL review and I use like rate my team over on Scout, and I use all these things to kind of help me with decisions. But sometimes I'll just watch a game and I'll be like, he looks really fun to own. And he's, it's not like buying someone who's not going to be a good FPL asset, but maybe he hasn't got like the best stats or isn't like the best transfer I could make. But sometimes I just see a player and I think I want that guy in my side. And then I'll move for them, because if I don't do it, and I do just pick a player because their stats are good and because everyone's buying them and EO is high and all that, and then the player that I actually want carries on doing well, that's the worst feeling in the world. Whereas it's the best feeling in the world when you're getting someone that not many people have and they bang.
I think it's just understanding what's going to make you feel the best on that
Yeah.
Sunday night
Yeah.
or Saturday night when you're doing a match of the day challenge. And I've just
Oh,
realised what you get to laugh at Mark for when Son scores his hat trick.
Oh yeah, I know. It's well, that's going to be tomorrow. The Son hat trick will be tomorrow because that's where they're playing Forest. But
of course, thank you.
If Salah blanks tonight, I advise everyone to just watch that game fully expecting a Son massive haul because it's almost certainly going to happen. The way his luck's going so far this season.
Az, would you like to hear the second reason you're going to sack me from hosting?
I can see there is a timer hacking down coming down on Zoom
because we're doing this on mine, not on whatever the account normally is.
Well, it's all right because the deadline's over. What I'd suggest we do is you put the starting Zoom back on.
Yep.
And then you close Zoom and then you redo it with the Scout one. That would be my suggestion.
Cool. We'll do that in a second, just when time's up a little bit closer.
Yeah.
But why don't we jump back to Fanslide and you can have a little chat about that?
Yeah, let me talk about Fanslide. Can everyone can hear me? People can definitely hear me this time. Yeah. We good, Seb? Yeah. So just a bit about Fanslide, who are kind of partnered with Scout this season. Obviously, I did this kind of speech earlier in the stream, but no one could hear me. But essentially, Fanslide is a way of playing kind of live one-off matches. So starting with the Southampton United game today. It's a brand new game, brand new app. It's free to play. There are betting elements to it. There's sort of a £2 and a £5 league as well. But there's a £100 prize pool, which is completely free. And essentially what you do is you slide in and out players who are playing in that match from both teams. You slide them in for 20 minutes. And once they've used that 20-minute window, you can't slide them in again. You can play against friends, you can play against others in the league. And it's just a really cool way of adding a bit more enjoyment to kind of a different game. I started playing it a few weeks ago. It was in beta. I thought I'd give it a try. I like to kind of play the sponsored games so I don't lie when I'm talking about them. And I can honestly say I've actually really enjoyed it. It's different to any other FPL or fantasy game that I've played before. I like the fact that it's free. I haven't spent any money on it at all, whatsoever. And I've played it alongside kind of some of the matches that I've watched. So if you're interested in that, do check out the video that I did with Joe, who's the founder of the app. That's on Scout. Just search for Fantasy Football Scout Fanslide. Do check out the link in the description as well, where you can download the app and give it a go. And just give it a go with the Southampton United game and see if you like it. Because it's a lot of fun. You start these players in, they earn 3 times, 2 times, 1 times points, and all those points are based on Opta stats that come in: interceptions, tackles, goals, everything. Basically, everything they do in a match is rewarded with points. So Seb, you'd love it because you can use your spreadsheets and analytics and stuff to kind of work out which players do well in this. I think there's a real kind of it's different. I think there's a market for it because it's once we play FPL and our deadline teams are locked in and there's nothing you can do. And if people don't like doing betting on first goal scorer and all that stuff, which I absolutely hate, then this is a different way of watching a match and playing it. So give it a go, check out the app, and let us know what you think on the comments in the chat and over on Scout as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. Right, I am going to change our graphics again, which means you won't be able to hear us for a second because I am a complete idiot. So bear with us for a moment, but maybe it'll be worth it, hey? Because I think we might have an argument.
Or should we do the starting Zoom now and sort out the Zoom? And
I was going to whet people's appetite with this so that both of the people that decide to stick with us actually do come back. So you should be able to hear me, and I am now just adding the wonderful Az back in as well. Now, hopefully, when this updates for the stream, you should be able to hear Az as well. Az, why don't you give us some lovely orating?
Beautiful, beautiful, Seb.
Lovely.
Yeah,
cool.
We're going to have a chat about some of these screens as well because you've somehow moved the nameplate over as well. It's
oh dear.
Where's Andy when you need him?
I know. Andy's so much better than me at this.
I'm only playing. Chat.
Fair enough. Let's make it good.
El Foz is in the chat saying you're doing fine, Seb. That's probably not praise from him. He has more technical issues than anyone I've met on these streams.
It's okay. I will try my best, and if it's not good enough, we'll do better. That's fine. So we have a couple of minutes before we hang up and come back again, because again, I'm a very stupid person. But what we are going to chat about is I have my last 2 seasons here, and as is last 2 seasons with our rank histories.
Remarkable, isn't it?
I mean, so no going, oh, we're good, we're bad. The chat's not about that. That's why I've only got the last 2. What I think is interesting is they're really similar. I mean, 2 seasons ago, they're basically identical. And even last year, the difference was probably like the last game week or something. Now, considering we play quite differently, I thought that was a really interesting thing to have a little look at and maybe even argue about. And I can cry that despite all my effort, I'm clearly no better than you. And you just make it up as you go along.
Oh, make it up as I go along. That is a horrible thing to say. Fairly accurate, but still horrible. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, 1 point difference. You know, when you think of 2,370 odd points, it wasn't the best season for either of us, was it? So
you know what that point was as well. On the last day, I forget who my goalkeeper was, but I did a goalkeeper transfer. Someone to Lloris, and the other goalkeeper outscored Lloris by like 1.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, I remember we were having a proper battle. We were having a proper. I do actually remember that us having a battle that season, and then again last season as well, because I think I was ahead of you for most of the season last year. And then the last few weeks,
Bruno, which was fine, but the rest of your team did badly. And
no, well, I know that's it. It's that bloody free hit I played. It's just that cost me a 1K finish. That did. It's terrible. Yeah, I mean, I played a game in kind of, it sounds really cliche, but I played a game in my own way, right? I like I said earlier, I use a few different things. I use all the tools on Scout a lot. I have done for years. So, I can't sit here and say that I'm a full like Grass FC manager who just watches games and uses my gut and bases it on instinct and stuff, because I don't. I watch games. If I like the look of players, I'll go and look at stats and use that to kind of reaffirm my decision. Whereas I think other people, not necessarily you, but other people, you do it in a different way. They prioritize the stats a lot more, and kind of go from there. I just love watching games. I love watching football, and the reason why I got into FPL was because I love watching my players that I've picked and what play matches and score points. So yeah, I don't know. It's I don't really know what my approach is. It's a hybrid.
Sounds suboptimal to me, mate. Right, we will be back in 1 moment. Thank you so much for your patience. Lovely. Hopefully, I've pressed 2 buttons in the right order this time, and people should be able to see and hear us. Anyone who's zoomed before and is too cheap to have the premium package will know exactly what happened to me.
That says a lot about you, Seb. It says a lot about you. Yeah.
See, at work we, I'm promoting other products here, but at work we use Teams. So Zoom is not new to me, but
well, other video conferencing tools are available. We should specify and work slightly better.
So we've worked out that I am suboptimal at hosting, but are you suboptimal at FPL? That's the question. Now, I think the important thing here is, as we mentioned a moment ago, we've got ranks on the screen here, and me and you are up here on YouTube. Hopefully, people can hear us talking about FPL. So yeah, ranks are important to us if only because, and hey, I'll be completely straight, this season I finished 135k. Season before that, I did very well. Finishing 135k and telling people what to do in FPL, it carries a bit less weight, right? I don't think rank should matter that much. It's about the process, and that's important to me. But it's a lot easier if you're a late riser and you can go, look, I finished 4th once or something stupid. So
it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Yeah.
And I think that's fine. It's absolutely fine to admit that. And, if that's what some people want out of it, cool. For me, and so, especially when we're doing Scoutcast and when we're talking today, of course we say pick this player, pick that player, blah, blah, blah. But for me, the important thing is not which player you pick, but the why and the process. And that's the bit that I'd love to improve myself. And if anyone gets anything from anything I say, it's that, hopefully. Unless I'm terrible, in which case ignore me. Ignore my lead's advice. But I think that comes back to then what you were saying, Az, because I guess the conversation I'd love to have with you is this process one. So we know I maybe look a little bit more at the stats, the analysis, the models, what have you. The reason I do that is that naturally I'm probably much closer to you in terms of I'll watch a football match and have a big old emotional reaction and want to do X, Y, and Z. But I know that about myself, and so I try and temper that by looking at the side that maybe removes that reactionary emotion from it. And I lean heavily into that side because I think it helps me. I think it's where I do okay. And I'm also into sort of looking at the biases in FPL and how we can maybe take our own silliness out of it. We can't remove it entirely because we're human, and that's what interests me about playing FPL and how I try and, again, to use that word, optimize my approach. And the reason I've used that a couple of times is optimal doesn't mean copy FPL review or copy the Rate My Team section on the Scout members area. All it means is try and make the best decision you can with the process you've identified that works for you. Lots of people believe that's watching football. Lots of people believe that's using models. Optimal just means using that to do the best you can. The reason models are good is because when me and you are watching a football match, there's a lot of information coming at us, whether we write that down, whether we remember it, whatever. A model cleans that up. It takes a lot of the noise out and gives you, hopefully, the signal. It's basically got a better memory. It's the same reason we use a calculator as opposed to an abacus or our head. And that's why I like that angle. Of course, there's lots more I could say on that, but I don't want to bore people too much. You yourself, I know maybe you steer away from the models. Is that because you want to feel like you're making your own decision, or you don't like some of the inputs? Maybe the model isn't the one for you. What do you think?
I mean, I'm not anti. I seem to have a kind of a bit of a rep as being like anti-analytics,
which you might have done that to yourself, my friend.
Well, mate. Well, I won't go into that because I'll probably just start another fight with the analytics crowd. But I've never been anti-analytics. I'm a researcher by trade. I've got a master's and PhD in psychology. I've done loads with stats over the years. I believe strongly in proper research and proper stats and all that kind of thing. So I know the power and the impact it has. I think the problem I have is with the word optimal in general, and maybe that's not the kind of the meaning behind it, but it's this idea that there's a perfect way to play FPL and that decisions that aren't within that strategy fall outside of the right way or the proper way to play. And that's the issue that I have. And I don't think that is generally what that means, because I think when you come back to what you're saying and looking at the kind of decision making stuff, and there are kind of like better decisions that you can make, and improving your decision making in FPL is important. That's why I started Black Box with Mark. That's why we look back at our previous decisions and try and work out what where we've gone wrong and that kind of stuff. But I just don't want there to ever be a sense like within the community that you should only be making moves that you feel like you have to make certain moves, and anything outside of that is deemed as being like the wrong thing to do. And if that move comes off for you, you're lucky. And if it doesn't come off for you, and if it does, and if it doesn't come off, then that's because you're an idiot and you should have listened to what everyone else is saying. I just think that kind of way of playing or that kind of thinking just makes everything a bit more of a toxic way of playing FPL personally, because I think people should be, and I think we see it a bit with even in the start of the season. I know we've got a very small sample size of data, and often a player can come back from injury. A good example was Martinelli last year. He hadn't played many minutes, but his stats were really nice. Now the models don't pick up on that because they need more data, they need more output, they need more input, they can't react quickly to stuff like that because they want more, which is research. You want more data, you want more evidence before you make a decision that Martinez is going to go off and score a brace against Leeds, for example. And I completely get that, but that should be the advantage that we have of watching games and looking at stats ourselves that can get one over on the model. So that's when it's kind of when you've got a whole pack of data and you're looking at kind of Salah versus I don't know, Rashford, and you look at all these things and go, okay, Salah is clearly the better pick than Rashford. Okay, that's kind of one thing. But when it's more 50-50, or when there's like other things to consider, I sometimes think the model doesn't always nail it, and that's when you can kind of go against it. And I wouldn't want to play FPL to not do that.
I think that's fair. So a couple of things there, I think. Firstly, obviously, when you're talking about, how we interact with each other, whether things are right or wrong or optimal, suboptimal, I have very little to add there. I agree with you, no matter how someone approaches the game. And of course, the analytics side have the opposite as well. The old watch football is played on grass, blah, blah, blah. That has nothing to do with how you play FPL and everything to do with just how you interact with people. There's never an excuse for anything other than being lovely. Apart from when you mess up hosting, then you can be horrible. But yeah, I think then on the model side, obviously it's like anything else, right? It has a set of inputs, it has a set of outputs, same as our brains. It's about whether you value what is going in and whether what you find is coming out is useful. And I think a lot of people as well believe that lots of different models, but some of the more popular ones just go on, say, past data. So they take XG and go, this player has that, this team has that, therefore 2.7. I think there's a lot more in it than some people realise. So some of the more popular ones have betting data in, which obviously does take into account more than just numbers. It's where the market is moving. It would take into account, say, tactical shifts that aren't picked up by the numbers yet. Also, when you then have the chance to, say, edit minutes and things, now that's where I think the edge exists. Where a model is good, just like a calculator, is if I say, okay, who's better, De Bruyne or Salah? With all these set parameters, so they're playing, away from home against this team, in this position, etc., etc., the model can compute that better than I can. It's a more reliable calculator than my head is. The bit where I can then come in is go, okay, cool, but I think there's been a tactical shift, or I think someone's minutes are at risk. Now, we're talking about this with Perisic, with Haaland, with maybe even Kane in the coming weeks. That's where we can then put a bit of ourselves into it and take what it gives us and edit it and get it to fit what we want. Now, of course, you have to trust the model. You have to trust those outputs. If you don't, fine, find another one or do something else. That's entirely fair. If you do trust it as a calculator, it's then just about how you use it for your own ends. Now, I would never advocate someone just puts their team in and does what it says, because we know, you want to have a bit of your own stamp, and we also know it might not be perfect. But I would take it as advisement, just like listening to us here, just like looking at the captain poll on Scout. You take it under advisement and then you make your own decision. And I think that really is the way to approach it. And the next level is people are now building solvers, because the one thing the model can't do is it can tell you who's great this week or even next week, but it's not going to morph your team to arrive at the best player in 11 weeks' time. You might be stuck with a horribly suboptimal squad because you keep picking the optimal one player. So a solver basically looks at your team, and Sertalp, people have seen them on Twitter, is very, very good at this. It'll pick your team and tell you what the route is to maybe the optimal team in 8 weeks, 10 weeks or whatever. And of course, there's plenty of uncertainty in that as well, which again is an opportunity for you to put your own stamp on it.
Yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating, and I love seeing the model evolve in the way it has done. I think you're talking about adding the betting stuff in, and the market shifts and the X minutes and all that kind of stuff, and seeing this kind of powerful tool evolve is fantastic. And I think it does come down to communication. And I think when you're so invested in Twitter, in the community, if I wasn't on Twitter at all, and I wasn't on Scout, and I was just playing my own game completely, and I was using the model to help me kind of inform decisions and stuff, I don't think there'd be an issue. But I think because of the way some people, because of how social media works in general, and I experience it a lot of the time. Sometimes I make a point and I rub someone up the wrong way. And, I've had messages from people being like, oh, what did you mean by that? And I've messaged them back saying, I genuinely didn't mean that. If that came across as being insulting, I genuinely didn't mean it like that. I was, trying to poke a bit of fun, or I was trying to, but it doesn't always come across kind of how you intend it to. You're limited to whatever characters it is, on Twitter. And it is a funny place. And it's the same on Scout as well, because it's so neutral. Well, because you can't get your tone across, you can't smile, you can't do all this kind of thing. Things can come across like completely the wrong way. So I think that's where you do get the trolls, you do get the people who are just genuinely quite nasty people, but not everyone is like that. But yeah, I want to see what I want to see is it just feels like at the moment things are heading off, and I think the Grass FC analytics thing is a bit of fun, but it does feel like it is starting to cause a bit of a divide about things. And I think it's a shame, because I think the majority of people who invest a lot in FPL do both. You don't not watch football games and have that kind of feeling of, I want to buy this player, but you also are going to be listening to people like us who talk about stats, talk about XG, use the models to kind of inform their decisions. So the vast majority of like hardcore players are going to be both anyway. So
isn't that the thing as well? We watch football and no one just focuses on how's that player moving, how are they striking the ball, or no one just focuses on he completed 93% of his passes.
Yeah.
Everyone does a bit of both. And stats only came about because people wanted to record what was happening in a match and where things were going.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. We're judging the same thing. We're both looking at a painting. We're just taking different things from it. And I think that's entirely fair. And again, to bring it back to what's on screen, that's why I've pulled this up. This is my last 2 seasons and Az's last 2 seasons. And as you can see, there just isn't a difference. Despite us approaching the game very, very differently, one of us could be skillful, one of us could be lucky, both of us could be both of those. It doesn't matter. We've ended up in very similar positions. And so if anything, I think that is testament to there are different ways of playing the game. And so the thing to take from it is, so for me personally, improving my decision making, and the way I judge that is by my rank, by my outcome. And a couple of bad seasons and a couple of good seasons don't necessarily dictate whether I've done that correctly. It's over time. And then for, I won't speak for you, but for Mark, when I was speaking to him last week, of course rank is important, but what he wants to take from it is maybe that enjoyment, that finding an edge that someone else hasn't done, or enjoying Bournemouth versus Forest, which is, a game that we might not watch otherwise.
Well, yeah, almost certainly wouldn't. No disrespect. Yeah, I think like the variance thing is probably the thing that I struggle with the most to kind of to wrap my hand around, because I get it, right, and you said it earlier. You play a match 10 times and you expect Salah to score in 9 of them. In the one that he doesn't score, kind of that's the variance element. Like I get why like people would say that, but I think it's a shame when people do make a call that goes against a lot of these things, and then it gets put down to that variance side, rather than just being something that you might have spotted that models haven't seen, or something that you've spotted with your own eyes. Because I think when you watch a lot of football games, I do genuinely think you do get a sense of how that game is moving that not always is kind of shown it within the stats as well. And I think a big one with that is where a player is playing on the pitch when they're off the ball. And that is something that I don't see in the stats when I'm looking at things like XG, when I'm looking at all the main heat maps, when they're receiving the ball, all that kind of stuff. They're the key ones that I look at. But I think the player movement on the pitch is a real like skill that you can get from watching more football games, and that tells you a lot about a player that you don't see in the stats.
Would you say that a player is taking up great positions but never receiving the ball, so it's something that isn't picked up in touch maps or whatever, but you are seeing when you're watching the football? Obviously, for that to translate into FPL points, you do need them to eventually touch the ball.
Yes.
So is there a tipping point where you're going, well, look, I'm seeing this happening, but they're never getting it. It's never being picked up in the stats, and therefore I need to give up on that, as it were. Would you be happy if it eventually translated into the stats, or are you just trying to like gain an edge before other people pick it up?
Well, I think there's 2 different ways of looking at it. I mean, I watched Neto play, for example, in those first 2 games, and we were all expecting him to be kind of out of position, right? And in the end, it was Podence playing up top and Neto on the left. But he wasn't just playing on the left; he was constantly like just in the wrong areas when the ball was being played. And I use the word wrong in the sense that it's wrong in the sense that I didn't feel like the ball was going to get played to him at any point, because he was quite far over to the left. He was in the penalty area. Maybe he was taking the touch and he was getting shots off, but they were all quite kind of near post. I didn't really sense in that game he was going to score. It's the same with Grealish as well. I watched Grealish last season, the first few games. I had him in my team, and on paper, he was taking up great positions. He was in the box, but there was always players ahead of him in the thing, and the ball wasn't dropping to him at all. And he ended up getting pushed further and further out wide. And you could just see it in the game. The touch map was one thing. He was like kind of, when he was receiving the ball, he was really out wide, but then he was kind of coming in. But I never got the sense that he was really going to be taking the ball in the really dangerous areas. And I don't want to keep talking about Gameweek, because obviously that was a 1 in a million kind of thing. But I watched him play in that Newcastle game, and he was bursting forward into the box and just wasn't getting picked out. And that was different to me, because I thought they're gonna realize this. They're gonna start finding those runs, and they did start finding those runs. And they're not doing it this season, because now he's dropping back into the midfield 3 and playing defensively. But they'd had injuries. Shelby was playing as well, so he was able to get forward. Now models and stats wouldn't pick that stuff up. And we've had it before. We've had it with Ramsey in previous seasons. We've had it with Yaya Toure in previous seasons as well. And these are players I think people will avoid and not get, because the stats just don't really showcase that kind of intelligent run that some players can make that just isn't borne out in the stats. So they're the kind of players. I think that particularly that number 8, number 10 position, your De Bruyne's, your Gundogan's, all that kind of stuff, they take a bit of time for the model to catch up, and they can be the ones that end up scoring big points.
I think this is one of the points that I find really interesting. When you picked Bruno, I was in support of that. Like, it's not a move I would have made myself. I didn't agree with you, but you had reasoning behind it, and you followed it through. And as we mentioned earlier, I'm never going to argue with that. You made a decision that was rational according to your process. For me, and the interesting point here, and I don't think we can know the answer, is when we're talking about players like, say, your Bruno, your Lingards, that famous little spell a couple of years ago. When do we know if our decision has, when you mentioned earlier, skill, luck, been lucky, or if it was something we did actually spot? And of course, outcome bias is a very big thing here, confirmation bias, because for every Lingard, for every Bruno, for the few games that he did do that, there's a Minamino who looked amazing for a couple of games. Even his stats were quite good for those couple of games. And then he disappeared. And we never remember those ones because, of course, they didn't score us points, so they don't stick in our head. But Bernardo from last year, he did score points for a while.
Yep.
A lot of people never picked him because it didn't look sustainable, and it wasn't sustainable. And while people might have got in on him early and therefore got some of the points where it carried on, you can never know when it's going to end, and that's why I wasn't a fan of it. But even on my side, right, maybe he just got unlucky and he was not getting lucky before. How do you decide whether your decision has been a success or whether you, for want of a better phrase, got away with it?
I think the only way you can do it is from watching the matches and just seeing where that kind of positioning is. I mean, Silva was an interesting one because I didn't feel it didn't. We'll look at the lineups in a minute from Southampton United, but Silva was an interesting one because I didn't sense that he was the same as Gundogan, for example. When Gundogan broke into the side a few years ago and he was making those runs into the box time and time again, getting on the end of everything, his stats massively increased. That was showing there was going to be some kind of consistency sort of between it. Silva didn't have that, right? And then the other thing with Silva is you've got the positioning in the team. They had players coming back as well. Where's he going to play on the left? Is he going to play in that kind of central spot? Gundogan was knocking around, and there was rotation and that kind of stuff. So I think if it was a bit different, and if he was playing for another side, maybe where his spot in that team was completely secure, and we saw evidence that was going to continue, I probably would have brought him in. But there was enough kind of flags around it to make me not kind of consider it. But I guess the question is, you don't know, right? You don't know when it's going to kind of end. I just had a feeling, my Grass FC brain coming in. I just had a feeling that wasn't going to be sustainable for Silva, so I didn't bring him in. But we've seen in the past that it can be. I mean, Milivojevic scoring penalty after penalty for Crystal Palace a few seasons ago. I got him in after that because I thought, okay, I think Palace are going to keep winning penalties. They've got skillful players. He's converting them. His average positioning is deep, but he is making runs into the box. I think he did get a couple of open play goals that season as well. So I think particularly with some of the cheaper players, you can just afford to take that punt on it, and then you give it a few. You give it a few weeks, and then you can kind of reassess. I think people forget that we have transfers, right? Sometimes, and that we're not locked into a player kind of forever.
Yourself, mate. I'm burning them as we speak.
exactly. You're bloody burning them. So when it feels like there is opportunity to get a player, and I'm not saying bring in a player who's got terrible stats and is don't bring in a Romeo who scores like a worldie, but I think if a player does score 3 goals, in 3 but doesn't necessarily have great stats. If the fixtures are good, if you see that role in the team being someone being quite attacking, I don't think there's any reason not to at least consider them, whereas a model would tell you not to.
I think to bring this background as well to where we started, that's what you want out of it. You want Bruno to score. You want to run up your stairs and celebrate it. Whereas maybe I'm sat here going, well, of course I expected Salah to score. No problem at all. And then I carry on with my day in boring fashion. I think for me, the main takeaway for me and the way I then approach it is that it's all probabilistic. If we played a match 10 times, something would happen 7 times, something would happen 3 times. We don't know which of those we're going to get in the one time we played in real life. But I'm going to go with 7 every single time. Even if I'm wrong every time, I'm still going to go with the odds weighted in my favour.
It's interesting because I played the Championship Manager game. Luke is winning that by a country mile. He's like 150 points clear of anyone. There's a few thousand people that play. He's already won it like 1 year. And the reason he wins it is because there's simulation data. So it's not exactly the same as the actual in-game engine that they use for the game, but people have like replicated, the teams and everything, and they can just run the fixture, blah, blah, blah. And he's just very good at knowing, exactly who hauls in what percentage of matches and that kind of stuff. I guess the question mark is, can you apply that same logic? I mean, you work for Football Manager, right? So you know this better than kind of anyone. But can you apply that same logic to an actual Premier League football game in which there are different moods and different attitudes? You think you can?
So, I mean, we've got a Leeds fan hosting and we're ignoring Man United team news. So that's nice. So maybe we should touch on that and then we can wrap up on this point.
Yep.
So over to you guys for that team news.
Yep, I will read out the names. So it's Southampton versus United. It's Bazunu in goal for Southampton. Does anyone have any Southampton players? I can't even imagine who they would have out of this lineup. Ward-Prowse, he starts. Walker-Peters, Bella Kotchap, Salisu, who is the strangest player, I think, in the league, or at least one of them, because some days I watch him and I think this is a world-class player. He could play for anyone. And then other days I watch him and think this is a League Two standard player.
Was fabulous.
It's incredible. There's no pressure. He just type us in. Amazing. It's Djenepo at left back again, which I also have my doubts about. It's Ward-Prowse and Lavio midfield. Kids and grown up Southern, so it's Arabo, Ilunis, I can't even pronounce the one. Eliunusi, Adam Armstrong, and the man off the bench, Che Adams, up top. And for United, it's De Gea in goal, Diego Dallo, Varane, Martinez, Malacia, McTominay and Ericsson, Sancho, Fernandez, Elanga, and Rashford, which I believe is the same team,
isn't it? Marshall was out injured, I believe. So
yes, yeah. So Casemiro's on the bench, so he's not started. Maguire's out again. No Shaw, no Wan-Bissaka, no Fred. They're all on the bench. So interesting. How do you see this one going?
I mean, I think that's probably a Man United win, but we've had 3 matches so far. 2 they were terrible, 1 they were wonderful. I honestly don't know. I think I'll go with they're not as good as they were against Liverpool, but they're probably not also as bad as they were against, say, Brentford. If you're a Man United fan, you're hoping for that upward trajectory to continue. If you're Ten Hag, obviously that's what you've been there for. You've had the summer, sure. You've still not got your signings, I don't believe. So it's still a work in progress. I think they've probably got enough today, if only because Southampton are one of my shouts to maybe go down. I think I really, really like Hasenhuttl and I love what Southampton have done. But I think it's maybe finally just run out of steam with the recruitment and with those tactics working for them. What about you?
They're just so incredibly inconsistent. Like you look at that game against Leeds, wasn't it? 2-0 down. Was that 2-0 down, right? And they came back to 2-0.
2-2 after they changed their approach as well. They went back to the 4-2-2, I think.
And then they play against Spurs and they go 1-0 up and they're looking quite good, and then it all kind of falls apart and Spurs just completely take over. I think they're quite a frail team at times. Like I think if things aren't going their way, they can kind of fall apart. And that's why I was surprised in that Leeds game when they're 2-0 down to kind of rally and come back and actually get the draw in that. But I just think that inconsistency over a season, and they were actually quite consistently bad towards the back end of last season as well. So I don't think they've got enough defensively. I don't think they can rely on Che Adams too much up top. I think they'll get points. I don't think they're going to be, right down the bottom, but they're definitely going to be in the mix. And I think this could be the year which if it finally runs out for them. But it is a shame. I mean, their model is just, buy players, sell them at a profit, buy cheap players. I mean, it's kind of similar to what Brighton do, really. I mean, we spend a bit more money than Southampton, but we do make quite big money on a lot of our players. But it does feel like Southampton, that kind of business model isn't always the best approach, because I think they've had some amazing players over the years.
Well, their recruitment team has changed a fair bit as well. Was it Paul Mitchell originally, wasn't it? Who I think is no longer there. So yeah, I think, and it's one of those. I mean, link it to what we were saying a minute ago, a bit like trying to pick gems in FPL. It's only so easy for so long. I think some of the ways Wenger, when he was at Arsenal in the early days, approached it, where one summer he was recruiting basically half the French league, which other people hadn't come across. You can't do that now. I mean, those big clubs have amazing scouting, and Brighton, Leeds, we're signing players from everywhere and anywhere. There isn't really that much of an edge to be found in uncovering a gem that no one else has seen yet. I think, and this is why maybe people are taking the more, for want of a better phrase, Moneyball approach, rather than finding the next superstar, it's possibly about finding the player that other people have overlooked. So Southampton, instead of finding your Van Dijk, who obviously has gone on to be amazing, I know one of the approaches Leeds has taken, and to be honest, this hasn't really worked for us, is someone like Firpo, a reclamation project. So someone who was brilliant at Betis, not so good at Barca, had some injuries, but we can get cheap. Can we get him back to the player he was? So far, the answer is no. But that's one of the approaches our recruitment team have taken. And then someone like Brighton have gone very heavily, I believe, into the analytics side of it. Of course, every club does that, but Brighton are very, very much governed by it, and like Brentford are entirely governed by that. And
I know,
you can see
yeah,
how
absolutely.
it works for them.
Yeah, I mean, Brighton's approach is interesting because I think the only kind of real sort of proven Premier League players we bought recently have been Welbeck and Lallana. If you look at the vast majority of our squad, it's made up of, I mean, Dunk's been around forever. Webster came from a lower league. And then you look at like our recruit, Hannes Batch, Izquierdo, Gross came from Germany, just been relegated. Trossard had played in Belgium. We've got a strong link with Belgium because our owner owns a club over there. That's where Undav's come from as well. So, we don't go for kind of tried and tested players really, and we use a lot of analytics to kind of make that decision. And a lot of the players that come over, you look at how they performed in those leagues, their stats are just absolutely kind of outrageous, and you wonder how that's going to translate. And it is hit and miss. For every kind of Trossard that we bring in, we also bring in a Locadia, for example, who is one of the worst players I've ever watched play ever. So it doesn't always work, but generally speaking, it does work. And we'll come back to the kind of Champman analytics stuff as well. But even in football, that kind of analytics approach is working so successfully for a lot of clubs. And you mentioned Brentford. I mean, Brentford's approach is genuinely fascinating. I would love them to do like a full documentary about it because they don't make any decisions that aren't based on that. So it's almost kind of like, what's the point of even having scouts in that side? Or is the entire scouting network just based on spreadsheets? So they're the ultimate spreadsheet FC.
So I don't think, obviously I'm a fan of the old spreadsheets, but for actual football, I like the phrase, football is played on grass, but FPL is played on spreadsheets. And yeah, you can take an analytical approach to football itself, but there isn't a substitute for actually scouting a player, actually talking to agents, actually meeting them. All of that will always have a place in the real world. And the reason for that, I think, is the big difference between us playing FPL and real football. In FPL, we aren't actually managing a team of players. We aren't managing confidence. We aren't looking after any personal issues or, seeing how they're training or managing nutrition, whatever those things are. All we have effectively is watching 90 minutes a week, watching some highlights, which is the tiniest window into someone's life. If we had to judge you by what you did in Gameweek 39, I'm not sure people would get an accurate reflection of how you feel about your life and your career. Never mind the football you were playing. And it's the same with us watching football. And then the stats
I think
themselves.
I had a very poor life. Let's just say that.
And then the stats, of course, just reflect that in, obviously a sort of a form we can use to build models and whatnot. So while we often talk about things like confidence or the way a player is playing or personal life stuff that we hear in the media, personally, I do try and set that aside. Not because I don't think it's important. I think it is incredibly important. But I don't think I have enough information to make a good decision based on it. And so I have to set it aside and base my decisions on things that I can quantify and test against and see if it's working. If I was a real manager, I'd take all that with me. And of course I'd be, I don't know, what was it, drawing a heart and a brain on a whiteboard like Arteta. Yeah. Of course I'd be doing that nonsense because that's super important. But only in real football, not in FPL. At least that's how I read it.
I'd be coming back to the Championship Manager example. I do often think because I see how good Luke is at the Champman game, and obviously that's a computer simulation thing, and it is different. But I mean, you work with Football Manager. There's all those ratings and data is based on scouts, and there's such a huge amount of stuff that kind of goes into it. It would be interesting to know, say you ran. I'm surprised more people haven't done this actually, because I mean, I'm a huge Football Manager nerd with it. I'd love to run every simulation of every game every week, like 100 times, and see exactly, use the lineups, check the scores, see who scored in that, and just see if there's any correlation between that and what happens in the game.
So something we do at work, obviously, when testing it, is run seasons over and over and over and over and over. Lots of times we have lots of test streams and whatnot running in the background. We're soaking the game constantly. And yeah, with that, you see lots of outcomes. One of the ways the match team test Match Engine is they will play a set of matches and they leave things running overnight, 1,000 times or whatever it is. And that spits out all the times that, certain goals were scored, all the times certain results were seen, etc., etc. And they can use that to then balance the Match Engine. And I guess this speaks, there's a model there, right? It's effectively a match model. This speaks to not focusing on me, 3 p.m. on a Friday, watching Arsenal versus Man City and going, oh no, Arsenal won 7-0, there must be a bug in the game. That's important information because we can look at what actually happened on the pitch and see why those goals were scored. But we need to take that in line with running that match 1,000 times. And if the 7-0 happened once, don't worry about it. Because if you played that match 1,000 times, that is one of the possible outcomes. But if the mean result was, say, a 2-1, a 3-1, whatever it is, then it's looking okay. Of course, it goes into more detail than that. But that generally is the approach that's taken with some of that testing. And I think that's then where, Luke obviously applies his simming to Championship Manager. And it's relevant to real life. But as we said, you only get the one in real life. You can't do it 1,000 times.
Yeah, I think that's where I kind of find it quite interesting because, like, say you take that Chelsea Norwich game last season, for example. I don't think the model or a simulation would have the average result as being 8-0 to Chelsea, right? Or whatever it was. Was it 8-0 in that game?
7.
Was it 7?
Chelsea,
okay, it would probably come out 3 or 4-0, right? That would probably be.
Yeah. So there are good at the people who run the FPL models. Again, the way that often works is they'll run a set of data 100 times, 1,000 times, or whatever it is, and you will get a spectrum of, Norwich won 1-0 right down here in the corner that one time. Chelsea won 3-0 50 times. They won 7-0 once all the way up here. And you'll have your outliers. And then, of course, the information it feeds back to you is effectively the mean or the median or whatever it is. It'll take, the most likely outcome. But it is aware that outliers can occur, and it does account for those. It just, in a single point of data, when it's saying this is how many points we expect, it's telling you the most likely outcome or the average of all the outcomes.
Yeah. So the average of that Chelsea Norwich game would be 3-0, for example. But 8-0 is a very strong possibility in that match, right? Which is why people were looking to captain Havertz. Right? Well, true. Yes, I guess it kind of balances out. That way. Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think that's the way, we often talk about players who can haul or players who have high ceilings. I think this is that very similar conversation. We acknowledge that when Bruno Fernandes was brilliant, he had a very high mean. Every week he was likely to score points because he was in the right position. He had good numbers. He was on penalties. So he always had quite a high floor or a high mean in the models. But his standard deviation or his ceiling was also very high because he could also explode. Now, the model is never going to go, this is the week he will explode. He will score 25 points because that's always not that likely. It's an unlikely thing to happen. It will happen once in 38 games because there is a 1 in 38 chance of it happening. But when you predict every single match for every single round, it's always going to go with the most likely outcome in that one instance. And this is where we come back to coin flips and we talk about probability. And I know a lot of people maybe don't like the coin flip analogy because humans aren't coins. We've got confidence and feelings and all that. And you're absolutely right. The coin isn't meant to represent a human. It's meant to represent the outcomes that we're talking about here and the chance of someone feeling good or bad or playing well or playing poorly.
Yeah. What I find fascinating about all of this is, I remember Vardy's run, for example, like years ago when he was like scoring every match. There's no way that a model would pick that up because each week he's got a certain likelihood of scoring in that match, and that's never going to be over 50% for 10 games in a row each match, right? So the chance of that, if you're looking at the coin flip, the chance of that happening over 10 matches is less than 1% or whatever. But I remember a Football Manager season I did once. I was playing as Spurs, I think, and it was Klasnic for Bolton. He scored every week for like 25 weeks, and he broke all the records in the league and everything. And I remember watching that thinking, if I ran this season 1,000 times or 10,000 times, he probably gets 5 to 10 goals across that 20-match period. Like, it is amazing that can happen both in the league and on the championship. I mean, that just comes down to that kind of probability. But I do sense that on Football Manager, that is like a ridiculous thing to happen. But if you were watching that live every game and you saw Klasnic in each game individually, you would jump on him because there must, if he scored 5 goals in a row, for example, playing up front, you're going to get him in.
See, I think that's a really nice analogy for what we're talking about, which is, you're sort of, I guess, because, you mentioned data only looks backwards, but I guess you're only looking backwards in terms of he scored 5 in a row. Therefore, I think he's likely to score again. Now, if we use the coin analogy, this is where it's useful, but we're not saying Klasnic is a coin. It's been heads 5 times in a row. What happens next?
Well, I know the answer to that. It makes no difference whatsoever.
Exactly. So I think that's still 50, that's the trap we often fall into. Now, of course, football is much, much more complicated. But for the logic behind that, there is still an even chance, or whatever it is, of him scoring in the next match or not. Form confidence could totally build into it, and that's fine, but all it does is weight that coin. And I think that's sometimes the thing that, well, me personally at least, I try and avoid. I probably run too far in the other direction. I remember us having a conversation about Foden last year, And the principle there was don't chase last week's points. You were very adamant that, but that's fine, but he's brilliant because he's going to keep getting points. I don't remember how that turned out. It doesn't matter. The point is, I think I maybe can go too hard against that sometimes, whereas I think you're more of a fan of steering into it, right? Hoping that you're getting early in a run.
Yeah, exactly. Well, was there any doubt in your mind, though, when Leicester played United and Vardy was going to break Van Nistelrooy's record of most consecutive goals scored? Was there any doubt in your mind that he wasn't going to score in that game? Because I was complete 100% convinced he was going to score at some point. And
I mean, I'm with you, but I think that's the emotional side, and that's why we enjoy football, right? Because it isn't, like we say, football on grass, FPL on spreadsheets.
But I think that's a lovely example of different approaches, because I think if you look at football completely objectively and you just look at models and stats and coin flips and all that kind of stuff, you think, okay, Vardy's got a 31% chance of scoring in this match, just the same as any other game, because I've ignored all the other factors that come into it. But realistically, me watching it, of course he's going to score this game. It's against United. He's going to break Van Nistelrooy's record. I can't remember if it was at the King Power or if it was at Old Trafford. I think it was at Old Trafford.
Can't remember.
I think it was at Old Trafford. Maybe the chat can kind of remind me, but I just knew he was going to score it. So obviously I captained him and had him and captained him in that game, even though the models and stuff would have suggested, a different player playing in a home match in a better fixture.
Maybe is one of those examples of like the confirmation bias where, like, brilliant example. I pretty much agree with you. I probably would have made the same call. But it's that one stunning example that we're remembering of a player doing something special on a special occasion. It's like the old scoring against your old club. Most players, including strikers, don't score against their own club. We just remember when they do, and it's kind of a bit of a cliche.
Probably, but my counter argument, which isn't even an argument because I think you completely agree from it, my counter argument is that's why I play FPL. That is literally why I play FPL, so I can celebrate with Jamie Vardy kicking a corner flag as he scores for the 10th consecutive game against Old Trafford. That to me is exactly why I play it, and I think that's where I think the I don't want to call Twitter and Scout and the comment section toxic, because a lot of the time it's not toxic. I have amazing interactions on there with so many different people talking about FPL, but that is just the element of things that I don't want to lose. And that's where I worry that maybe that's the way it's heading a little bit. I look at the teams now and the similarity between things. I don't think the FPL pricing helps, for example, because it doesn't lend itself really to discussion. Because if the only discussion to be had is with me and Mark debating whether we should have Salah or not, it's like, of course you should have Salah. It's not even a discussion, right? But when you're looking at, even discussions over like Rodrigo and Gross, that's an interesting one, for example. But you're not going to debate, Martinelli versus Gross, because obviously Martinelli is a better option.
I think that's where some of the edge and some of the interesting discussions do still exist, in terms of, sure, if we are trying to choose between two players, the model can give us probably the best prediction of what's going to happen more often than not. But the interesting bit is, are our inputs correct? Are the minutes correct? Is the tactical situation correct? And I think that's, more, if you want to use those words, grass FC than anything else. And, I speak to a lot of analytics people, and I think that is something we speak about most. If he plays here, great, but is he going to play here? And I think a lovely thing to end on is you talking about what you want from FPL is the knee slide.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be knee sliding across my living room along with whatever mad player I bought in that week.
Well, I hope you do it this weekend, but not as much as me. Thank you, everyone, so very, very much for joining us on this deadline stream. Thank you for putting up with me. And if I never do it again, I've been your Gary Neville at Valencia.
You'll be back. You'll be back, Seb.
Everyone.
Good luck, everyone. See you soon.